Urgent, the Baltic frontier. Putin is planning an invasion, a Donbas scenario in Estonia. Medvedev declares Estonia to be Russia. But here the trap will snap shut on the Kremlin itself. NATO is deploying elite units. It's begun. The West has an infernal surprise for Putin. Build maps and invasion scenarios. Plus, NATO is launching Operation Eastern Guard, completely closing the skies to invaders. Welcome to the Ukraine Today channel. While Skabeeva hysterically blames Tallinn and Riga, Europe is preparing a crushing response. I'm Andrei Silakov. Let's discuss how the civilized world is backing the dictator into a corner. The Kremlin is having another flare-up of imperial psychosis. Dmitry Medvedev, in his usual style, declared Estonia part of Russia, trying to scare Europe with historical fairy tales.
The lab-rat Kallas, whose face was devoid of intelligence, hit the mark again by stating that Russia is demanding what it never had. Donbas, which belonged to Russia and no one else. It's a pity to be so stupid at 50 years old. In fact, Estonia, oh the horror, was also part of Russia.
This was a response to Kaja Kallas's earlier statement.
This is clearly the wrong approach. Of course, this is a Russian negotiating tactic. They demand something that was never theirs. And that's why we also note that this is a trap we must not fall into, Kallas said.
But while Medvedev practices his insults, Western intelligence already sees the enemy's real plans. The BILD publication released maps of a possible offensive where Narva, Riga and Vilnius are marked as the main targets of Putin's arrows. Russia dreams of a multi-pronged strike, but forgets that the world is no longer what it was in 2021.
BILD published a map of the Russian Federation's invasion plan for the 3 Baltic states. It's worth remembering that back in 2021, over 4 years ago, BILD released a map of Russia's future invasion of Ukraine. Back then, people on social media laughed and mocked it very loudly. And a little later, Zelensky suggested preparing for May Day barbecues. By the way, the Estonians, instead of preparing for those cursed May barbecues, are preparing the population for war. Exercises are underway not only for the army but also for the Kaitselit. These are voluntary paramilitary formations. And drone pilot units and much more are being prepared. Strange, these Estonians, right?
The Baltic states today are a powerful outpost, preparing for a big fight every single second. In Estonia, Kaitselit volunteer exercises and drone pilot training are in full swing. And NATO views the region as a single operational space. Political scientist Carlo Masala confirms the alliance has already deployed multinational groups in Narva under British leadership, and this is only the front line of deterrence. Putin can draw any invasion routes from Kaliningrad or Belarus, but at every meter his troops will face the combined power of the most technological alliance in human history.
As the expert notes, NATO forces are already partially present in Estonia. Near Narva, a multinational battle group led by the United Kingdom is deployed, serving as a forward line of deterrence. Among the possible steps to bolster security, the expert specifically mentions deploying NATO units directly in Narva. This approach, he believes, could significantly increase the level of deterrence, because in the event of an attack, Russian troops would immediately face alliance forces.
While Moscow dreams of conquest, reality is hitting it right on the nose. The defense ministers of Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania called on NATO to immediately bolster air defenses and launch an operation, Guardian of the East. The alliance is already mobilizing additional surveillance forces and fighter jets to protect the eastern flank. Europe is taking total control of the skies. Any attempt by Putin's tin cans to violate the border will end in their instant destruction. Meanwhile, the Kremlin has launched a massive info-op, trying to convince the world that the Baltic states opened their skies for Ukrainian attacks. But in Riga and Vilnius, they view this cheap circus with irony. This is reported by European Pravda, citing a statement from the Latvian Defense Ministry.
With such statements, Russia demonstrates its weakness and tries to distract attention from the fact that it's unable to defend against successful Ukrainian counteroffensives on Russian infrastructure on the Baltic coast. Disinformation and social media bots are being used, targeting Russian-speaking audiences and involving young people.
Russia is trying to split NATO through disinformation, but it's having the opposite effect. The alliance is only uniting more strongly around Ukraine. The hybrid war that Putin loves so much is drowning in facts and the West's technological superiority. Experts unanimously agree that Russia lacks the resources for 2 fronts. The full-scale war in Ukraine has drained the Kremlin, and any attempts at local operations in the Baltics would be suicide.
They won't fight against the Baltic states the same way they're currently waging war against Ukraine. They plan to use UAVs, drones and missiles, but also a significant deployment of military hardware.
The Leningrad military district. Though reinforced, it's more of a facade for reports than a real strike force. According to the expert, without a buildup of troops in Belarus, any Narva People's Republic scenarios remain just pipe dreams of the patriots.
NATO is preparing for such actions. In fact, all their exercises assume that Russia will use firepower of various kinds in one way or another, and they're preparing to counter it.
The final chord for the dictator is obvious. Europe today is taller, stronger, and better prepared. NATO is already accounting for all possible threats, from drone swarms to attempts to block the Suwalki Gap. While Moscow monitors the use of interceptor missiles in the Middle East, the Baltic states are becoming an impregnable fortress. The Kremlin is launching hybrid terror in the Baltics, trying to mold more people's republics, based on the worst-case scenarios of Donbas. While the skies of Lithuania and Estonia are under attack by provocations from Belarus, Putin's little green men are vainly searching for loopholes in NATO's solid defense. To find out why this suicidal plan of the dictator will fail under the blow of the alliance's technology, watch right now.
To learn the Ukrainian lesson while it's not too late, the Minister of Defense of Lithuania is going to Kyiv. The country's president, Gitanas Nausėda, admitted that the sky over Lithuania, while not full of holes, is an open book for low-flying drones. Therefore, the Lithuanians are ready to adopt the experience of the Ukrainians.
First of all, we need to pay attention to detection capabilities because we still find that our detection zone is weaker when drones fly at low altitudes, that is, up to 300 meters. We have plans, and the Ministry of Defense has presented how they intend to acquire all the necessary means, not only for effective detection, but also for fighting these drones. The problem is that not all of these plans are being implemented right here and now. Anti-drone equipment is not sitting on store shelves, and you can't buy everything at once.
Lithuanian intelligence services are still studying whose drone exploded in the area bordering Belarus. The sound of its flight was heard even in Minsk. The drone exploded over Lake Lavisas. Experts do not rule out that it was an off-course Ukrainian UAV that was supposed to attack northwestern Russia. Every such incident in the Baltics puts the population on edge, as analysts from various countries have long predicted. Small Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania are an easy target for Putin to rattle NATO's nerves.
In the Baltic countries, there are about 10,000 NATO troops today. One cannot say that this is nothing at all, but it certainly cannot counter a full-scale invasion. From the point of view, if we are talking about a special operation, these bases will be blocked. And with such a development of events, it is very difficult for me to imagine that NATO troops will go for some heroic breakthrough in order to protect someone. At best, they will protect themselves.
Russians are increasingly engaging in provocations against the Baltic countries, especially towards Estonia. Military fighter jets were in the airspace of a NATO member for a full 12 minutes. A group of little green men showed off in full gear, and 3 border guards in uniform crossed the border on foot near the Narva River. There are more Russians here than Estonians, and they all speak Russian. Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania themselves will soon crawl to Russia on their knees.
Well, the whole city is Russian.
Narva. It is from here that Russian Ivan will begin his journey through NATO lands. The name of this town of only 50,000 people appears in all reports on the Kremlin's plans.
The threat of a Russian invasion of Estonia, and therefore a country of the European Union and NATO, is more than real. Moreover, I have been voicing this scenario for several years now, because in reality, it would fully align with the Russian approach to conducting hybrid warfare against the West. At the same time, more specifically as some kind of local invasion, possibly even an invasion in several different areas, depending on the situation.
Just the other day in Estonia, accounts of the so-called Narva People's Republic became active with calls for separatism and memes, waiting for Russia. These public pages were registered in February of last year, but only recently began to be filled with content on a massive scale. Local authorities have assured that the Russians are using their favorite method, blackmail and pressure.
The goal of such operations, of course, is to cause confusion and create such an impression quite cheaply with minimal costs, as if there are people who would like to, so to speak, separate Narva. But that is definitely not true. Similar channels have been created before, including in other European countries. For example, in 2014, after the occupation of Crimea, such groups were created in Latvia, in the Latgale region.
The Baltic states are effectively squeezed between 2 potential aggressors, and unfortunately, in the United States, it seems they are ready to yield their sovereignty in favor of the interests of dictators. This is exactly how the meeting of Special Envoy Donald with 3 openly pro-Russian Lithuanian politicians, which John Cole held before his visit to Minsk, is interpreted.
The threat to European and Lithuanian security will come not only from the Russian regime, but also from the puppet Lukashenko and from the Trump administration as well. For us, what would be most dangerous, what would truly pose the greatest risk, is if these interests did not converge and did not coincide as they do in Hungary. But yesterday's meeting with the fringe elements just shows that these interests can converge at the expense of our security. In fact, with yesterday's meeting with the Lithuanian fringe, Trump's representative actually demonstrated that he will, in fact, rely in Lithuania on those particular people who actually pursue and support a pro-Russian policy, who serve and promote Russian interests. The same thing that is happening now in Hungary. They both support Orban, So we need to proceed from such a perspective, and naturally then only the strengthening of the European component, that is the European Union itself as such, can provide a counterweight to such a development of events in such a situation.
Warnings of a Russian attack on the Baltic states have been around for decades. But right now, despite the huge losses and spending on the aggression in Ukraine, the Kremlin is ready to strike. Experts are certain. And most importantly, politicians must treat every provocation as a potential strike. Otherwise, in reality, we'll see the parable of the boy who cried wolf.
A potato trap for Putin. An attempted new offensive from Belarus will be a one-way ticket for both dictators. The Kremlin is trying to force Lukashenko toward Kyiv. But the old man is terrified of a popular uprising and the revenge of the Ukrainian armed forces. Watch right now to see why our border has become a concrete fortress and why any enemy provocation will lead to the instant collapse of the Minsk regime.
The Belarusian leader, who is also the Russian dictator's biggest fan and sycophant, is back in the spotlight.
We see what's happening around us, and today we need to update our defense. Well, maybe not the doctrine, but our defensive actions, so that everyone can see, especially our people, that we're ready to defend every inch of our land.
Following Putin's lead, Lukashenko is building ties with Kim Jong-un. The leaders of North Korea and Belarus signed a friendship and cooperation treaty during the first official visit to the DPRK by the potato leader, for whom Kim Jong-un hosted a lavish reception in Pyongyang. As part of the official ceremony, Lukashenko visited the Liberation Monument dedicated to Soviet soldiers and laid flowers at the request of the Kremlin dictator, as a sign of gratitude for Russia's help. Lukashenko, who has ruled Belarus for over 30 years, remains the Kremlin's primary ally. Since 2022, he has provided his country's territory as a staging ground for the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. And now he has also hosted Russian tactical nuclear weapons. In effect, Belarus has become a key instrument in Moscow's military plans.
We don't consider anyone our enemy or rival, but nevertheless, we're preparing for this war so that it doesn't happen.
The publication Belarus Tomorrow writes that Minsk could soon either join the attack on Ukraine or again become a staging ground for a new offensive on Kyiv. The decision on a possible offensive depends mainly on the Kremlin, not on Lukashenko.
Such information should be classified as active operations in the information space aimed at shaping public opinion. Furthermore, such operations should be linked to the activities of the Russian special services. This leak of information is occurring against the backdrop of the Republic of Belarus's rapprochement with the United States. Moreover, the Trump administration's decisions effectively removed the Republic of Belarus from the Russian Federation's sphere of military and political influence.
Experts note that the enemy simply won't be able to prepare a large-scale offensive without Ukrainian intelligence noticing.
The Ukrainian intelligence community tracks any negative trends related to the redeployment of the armed forces of the Republic of Belarus or the expansion of the Russian Federation's military presence on that state's territory. And at the moment, it's not really possible to speak of any real threats coming from Belarus.
Lukashenko is trying to project strength while simultaneously pleasing Putin so that his own power remains unthreatened. He has no interest in directly dragging Belarus into the Russo-Ukrainian war. as this could lead to extremely unpleasant strategic consequences for him, even including his removal from power. So all that's left is to suck up to Putin, which he does with great pleasure.
Our idea is absolutely the same. You know our ideas and we know the Russian ideas. It's one fatherland. From Brest to Vladivostok, we have one fatherland. Well, it wasn't by our will that two separate states were formed here, and we must do everything to ensure our relations in this fatherland are even closer than in a unitary state.
Lukashenko is using a well-known tactic, the so-called walking between the raindrops. That is, he's trying to maneuver between the interests of the Russian Federation, the People's Republic of China, and the United States. He creates so-called centers of counterweights, which allows him to solve his main issue, namely maintaining his own power and, consequently, the possibility of passing it on as an inheritance.
At the same time, in no other sphere is there such close cooperation between Russia and Belarus as in the military. In January, Belarus received a new batch of some of the most powerful Russian fighters, the Su-30 SM-2.
It's also worth noting the reports about the deployment of the Oreshnik on the territory of the Republic of Belarus. But one key point is that the Oreshnik is being placed 4, at most 6 kilometers from the Russian border. So this precisely provides an opportunity to, well, avoid the possibility of the launchers being destroyed as a result of, let's say, retaliatory actions by either the Ukrainian side or NATO countries.
In fact, the Belarusian defense industry has also shifted to a war footing today, put there by Lukashenko himself out of fear of losing power and the country. Meanwhile, the potato Führer has long tried not to rely solely on Russia and is looking for other supports in case things go south for Moscow. By the way, in the US, there's been talk for several months about the possibility of inviting Lukashenko to meet with Donald Trump at the White House.
And at the front, there's trouble. The spring collapse of Putin's army. The occupiers' offensive has officially stalled. While the Kremlin panics to invent excuses for its people, our defenders are confidently moving forward and grinding down the enemy at every turn. See more on how Ukrainian strength is turning the dictator's imperial ambitions into a pile of scrap metal.
With the arrival of spring, the occupation units as usual moved forward. But the current colossal losses suffered by the Russian army in these countless and senseless assaults are already being criticized by even the most pro-Kremlin military bloggers.
On March 19th, the commander of the 144th Motorized Rifle Division, Major General Dmitry Mikhailov, pushed significant forces of his division into an attack on enemy positions. The outcome was tragic. They report the destruction of over 80 units of motorized equipment, 3 tanks, 11 infantry fighting vehicles and armored personnel carriers, 5 artillery units, 1 Sonsepyok, and about 160 drones. Of course, if the operational situation allows for large-scale offensive operations, then it should be taken advantage of. But the key in all of this is if the situation allows. A commander must rationally weigh the risks and potential results when making a decision, rather than playing roulette and hoping for the best.
This refers to the Lyman direction, but the criticism is the same on other sectors of the front. Exhausting assaults do not yield the desired results and lead to colossal losses.
Russian generals are simply stepping on the same old rake. That is, the same situation repeats every year. Spring arrives, the soil has dried out, the mud season is practically over, and it's possible to attack. Attack with what? Well, let's go attack with tanks and armored vehicles. Never mind that there are drones in the air, let's attack with tanks.
The Ukrainian General Staff notes that the Russian army set a new record for losses in 4 days, from March 19th to the 23rd. The occupiers lost 6,100 soldiers. The fact that the occupation forces have begun a massive offensive was also confirmed by the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Syrskyi. The Russian army is trying with all its might at the start of spring to break through the Ukrainian defense.
The enemy tried to break through the defensive lines of our troops in several strategic directions at once. Fierce battles have unfolded along the entire line of combat engagement. In total, the enemy conducted 619 assault actions over these 4 days. The occupiers concentrated their main strike on the Pokrovsk and Oleksandrivka directions, where the highest number of enemy attacks occurred. Specifically, in the Pokrovsk direction, the enemy attacked our troops' positions 163 times. In the Oleksandrivka direction, 96 times.
Analysts from the American Institute for the Study of War believe that Russia's spring-summer campaign has already failed. Losses are disproportionate to the recruitment of new soldiers, and the Kremlin already has little equipment left.
Such a high level of losses is unacceptable given the current rate of recruitment in Russia and will likely reduce Russia's ability to conduct such large-scale assaults in the medium and long term.
Such heavy losses, the Russian army can still afford for the time being. And it's too early to say that the occupiers' offensive has been thwarted. So far, the AFU has had its first successes and they need to be consolidated.
A specific attack was thwarted. That is, right now they've thwarted a series of attacks in different directions. But to say that the offensive is thwarted creates a misunderstanding of the current combat situation on the front line. That is, it gives the impression that the entire Russian offensive operation is just completely over, thwarted. And now the Russian generals are sitting there, scratching their heads, like, what do we do? Damn, the plan didn't work. Let's put it on pause for now. Let's come up with new directions of attack and attack there. No, nothing like that is happening. Specific attacks were thwarted.
According to analysts, Russian troops are unlikely to capture the fortress belt in Donbas in 2026. Most likely, they will achieve minor tactical successes, and even then at the cost of heavy losses. Therefore, the Kremlin's top officials are already preparing the population for the fact that there will definitely be no major successes at the front this year.
Russian officials are already shaping expectations in the information space regarding slow progress and heavy losses. However, one of the deputies of the Russian State Duma stated on March 23rd that there are casualties in all wars. But Russian troops will try to minimize losses, advancing slowly towards Sloviansk and Kramatorsk.
The spring-summer campaign of 2026 has only just begun, and the AFU clearly had a successful start. Ukrainian troops are acting proactively and inflicting huge losses on the enemy, but this is only the beginning of the campaign.
And what do you think about these events? Write your opinion in the comments. Don't forget to like and share this video. Stay with us because it gets even more interesting.